Emotionally unavailable. Written and published by Books Reader. What happens when a kind heart turns into a fortress? When someone who once gave love, trust, and care freely chooses to shut the world out. This change isn't a sign of weakness or selfishness, it's a means of survival. Behind every emotionally unavailable person lies a story, wounds too deep to heal quickly, betrayals that shattered their foundation, and a heart that has learned the hard way to guard itself. This book delves into the journey from warmth to detachment, exploring the experiences that transform an open soul into a guarded one. It also examines the delicate balance between protecting one's heart and allowing vulnerability back in. If you've ever wondered why someone close to you has become distant, or why you have, this book offers insight, healing, and hope. Lesson 1: Deep betrayals teach the heart to trust armor over intimacy. Trust is the fragile thread that binds human connections. When betrayal severs it, the break isn't clean, it unravels everything we believed about love, safety, and human nature. The first betrayal may plant a seed of doubt, but it's the profound ones, the ones that shake us to our core, that teach us to armor ourselves against future pain. These betrayals come in many forms. Sometimes, they arrive in the form of infidelity, discovering that someone who vowed forever was living a double life. Other times, they take shape as small, repeated deceptions that, over time, erode our ability to trust. The betrayal might stem from a parent who prioritized addiction over presence, a best friend who weaponized our secrets, or a partner who discarded years of love for a fleeting moment of selfishness. The immediate reaction to such pain is raw, overwhelming heartbreak. It can feel impossible to imagine ever trusting again. But humans are resilient, and in the aftermath, we begin to construct walls of protection. Vulnerability, once as natural as breathing, starts to feel like an open wound, too dangerous to expose. And so, the heart, in its wisdom, begins to fortify itself. The first layer of armor is skepticism, a lens through which every interaction is filtered. Smiles seem less sincere, promises sound less convincing. The next layer is emotional distance, keeping people at arm's length to minimize the risk of further hurt. We perfect the illusion of connection while maintaining careful boundaries. With time, the armor strengthens. Responses become calculated instead of spontaneous, words are chosen strategically rather than spoken openly, and observation replaces blind trust. We become experts at reading between the lines, searching for hidden motives in every conversation. The heart, once an open book, turns into a fortress with tightly guarded gates. What makes this transformation so insidious is how logical it feels. Every wall we build is backed by experience, every layer of protection validated by pain. We begin to take pride in our impenetrability. "I won't be fooled again" stops being a thought and becomes a way of life. But this same armor that shields us from pain also blocks out joy. The barriers we erect to keep betrayal at bay also prevent us from experiencing deep, meaningful connection. We might sense this loss in quiet moments, but the memory of past wounds convinces us the sacrifice is necessary. It feels safer to be encased in steel than to risk another heartbreak. Eventually, the armor becomes a second skin, so much a part of us that we forget we were ever different. The vulnerability we once embraced now seems reckless, naive. We see glimpses of our former selves in old photographs or journal entries, but that version of us feels like a distant stranger. Perhaps the most significant shift is how we come to view love itself. It becomes something to analyze rather than experience, something to manage rather than surrender to. We start perceiving emotional openness as a weakness, vulnerability as a liability. The very traits that make love possible become the ones we avoid most. And this is how good people become cold-hearted, not in an instant, but through a slow, steady process of self-preservation. The armor that was meant to be temporary becomes permanent, and the heart that once beat freely begins to trust its protective shell more than the possibility of true connection. Lesson 2: Childhood wounds create masters of emotional distance. The wounds inflicted during childhood shape the way we experience emotions for the rest of our lives. In those formative years, when our understanding of love and security is still developing, the lessons we learn become the blueprint for all future relationships. Early experiences leave deep imprints, often transforming open-hearted children into individuals who master the art of emotional distance. Family dynamics play a crucial role in this shift. Children who grow up in environments where expressing emotions leads to punishment, ridicule, or neglect quickly learn to suppress their feelings. They develop an almost instinctive ability to read the emotional climate around them, adjusting their behavior accordingly. A father's clenched jaw, a mother's vacant gaze, or a sibling's mocking laughter become signals that trigger an instinctive retreat. The child quickly learns that safety lies in invisibility. Emotional needs are gradually tucked away, hidden behind carefully crafted walls of indifference. What begins as a survival strategy, the ability to detach from feelings, eventually becomes second nature. Over time, the child develops an intricate system of emotional checkpoints, each designed to regulate and suppress emotions before they become a liability. These early wounds shape patterns of attachment that persist into adulthood. A child who learns that vulnerability leads to rejection will unconsciously recreate situations that reinforce this belief. The emotional distance that once served as protection from unreliable or unavailable caregivers becomes a default way of engaging with the world. Parents who struggle with their own emotional wounds often, unknowingly, pass down patterns of disconnection. A mother unable to process her own emotions cannot teach her child how to navigate theirs. A father who buries his sensitivity beneath a hardened exterior sends an unspoken message that feelings are a weakness. These lessons are rarely spoken aloud but are instead embedded in countless small moments, missed connections, dismissals, and emotional abandonment. The mastery of emotional distance often begins with seemingly minor betrayals, a promised visit that never happens, an achievement that goes unnoticed, tears met with indifference or irritation instead of comfort. Each of these moments adds another brick to the wall separating the child from their true emotions. They begin to take pride in their independence, their ability to handle everything alone, and their emotional self-sufficiency. As they grow, these children refine their ability to maintain emotional distance. They learn to deflect intimacy with humor, intellectualization, or an overpacked schedule. Their relationships remain surface level, controlled, and devoid of vulnerability. They may thrive in professional environments where detachment is an advantage but struggle in personal relationships that demand emotional openness and trust. Ironically, these individuals often appear highly capable, admired for their ability to remain composed in moments of crisis. Others turn to them for support, drawn to their unshakable exterior. Yet beneath this controlled facade lies a carefully guarded inner world, a place that holds the echoes of past wounds and a deep fear of reopening them. The child who mastered emotional distance carries this skill into adulthood, treating relationships like calculated risks rather than spaces for genuine connection. They approach intimacy with caution, setting rigid boundaries and allowing only limited access to their innermost thoughts and feelings. But these childhood wounds don't just create emotional distance, they perfect it. Every relationship becomes an exercise in refining these defenses, reinforcing the barriers that shield the vulnerable child within. Those who excel at emotional detachment take pride in their ability to remain unaffected, believing they have risen above the unpredictable chaos of human emotions. Yet, deep within, a part of them still longs for the very connection they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Lesson 3: The art of numbing turns pain into power. The human psyche is remarkably adaptive, developing intricate mechanisms to transform emotional pain into a perceived form of strength. This transformation happens gradually, often as a response to wounds too deep to process in the moment. Like a fighter learning to absorb blows, the heart builds calluses where it was once soft, turning raw vulnerability into a protective shell of indifference. Initially, numbing serves as a survival tool, an emergency response to overwhelming emotions. What begins as a temporary disconnection eventually solidifies into a way of life. The mind distances itself from feelings, observing them from afar rather than fully experiencing them. This detachment creates an illusion of mastery over one's emotions, as if standing above them rather than being consumed by them. The conversion of pain into power manifests in different ways. Some individuals become highly skilled at rationalizing their emotions, reducing complex feelings into logical problems that can be solved rather than felt. Others develop the ability to deflect, expertly steering conversations away from any topic that threatens to pierce their emotional armor. Over time, this skill, born out of hurt, becomes a source of pride, a testament to their resilience and ability to remain untouchable in the face of life's emotional turmoil. As the numbing deepens, people often realize that their emotional detachment grants them certain advantages. In both personal and professional negotiations, their ability to remain unaffected makes them formidable. They make decisions unclouded by emotion, unaffected by sentimentality or manipulation. This further reinforces the belief that their numbness is not a burden, but a strength, not a wound, but a weapon. However, the control derived from emotional numbing carries a dangerous allure. The more one suppresses pain, the more distant they become from life's full spectrum of experiences, not just suffering, but also joy, love, and connection. The illusion of invincibility. When nothing can hurt you because nothing can reach you, an intoxicating sense of invulnerability takes hold. This detachment becomes addictive, driving people to further refine their ability to disconnect. They may even take pride in their emotional indifference, believing their ability to remain unaffected by situations that would devastate others is a sign of strength. Yet, this transformation comes with hidden costs, often unnoticed until they become ingrained in one's identity. The same numbness that shields from pain also blocks joy, love, and genuine connection. The power of emotional detachment is like a fortress, offering protection while also acting as a prison. The ability to avoid suffering becomes inseparable from the inability to experience life's full emotional spectrum. Those who master this art of numbing often, unknowingly, pass it on, demonstrating to others how to disconnect without ever saying a word. They attract admiration from those who mistake their composure for resilience, reinforcing the illusion that their numbness is a strength rather than a wound. The irony is that the power gained through emotional disconnection is both real and deceptive. While it provides a genuine shield against emotional harm, it simultaneously diminishes the richness of life itself. The person who masters detachment becomes like a general who has won every battle but forgotten why they were fighting in the first place. Their heart, once capable of experiencing the full range of emotions, is reduced to a single muted note. This is how pain is transmuted into power, through a process that trades emotional depth for the illusion of invulnerability. The kind-hearted person who becomes emotionally distant does not do so intentionally but rather through a series of small, unconscious choices. Each moment of emotional retreat trades a piece of their sensitivity for a fragment of perceived strength until, one day, the transformation is complete. Lesson 4. Love becomes a game of chess instead of a dance. Romance loses its spontaneity when the heart learns to calculate rather than feel. What was once an effortless dance of emotions turns into a strategic game, where each move is carefully planned to minimize risk. The emotionally unavailable person approaches relationships as a chess master approaches the board, analyzing patterns, anticipating threats, and always thinking several steps ahead. This shift happens gradually, as experience teaches that emotional spontaneity leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability is dangerous. Instead of embracing feelings as they come, every action becomes deliberate. Messages are carefully crafted, responses are strategically timed, and emotional expressions are rationed. The exhilarating rush of falling in love is replaced by the cold satisfaction of maintaining control. True romance requires trust in the moment and faith in one's partner. But for those who have learned to guard their hearts, trust feels reckless. They have seen too many people stumble, too many partners change course mid-performance. So they trade the unpredictability of dancing for the precision of strategy, preferring to orchestrate the movements rather than risk becoming a vulnerable participant. Each potential relationship is assessed like a chess position. What are the possible outcomes? What could go wrong? What defenses must be in place? People become pieces on a board, pawns to be advanced or sacrificed, knights with predictable movements, bishops following rigid diagonal paths of interaction. The queen, representing one's own heart, is protected at all costs, hidden behind layers of carefully placed defenses. The thrill of love's uncertainty is replaced by the satisfaction of emotional security. Spontaneous gestures of affection are no longer expressions of genuine feeling but calculated moves designed to maintain control. I love you is no longer a raw declaration but a strategic phrase deployed at precisely the right moment for maximum impact. Every emotional response is filtered through a lens of tactical advantage rather than authenticity. This calculated approach extends beyond romantic relationships into friendships and family dynamics. Every interaction becomes part of an endless game where the ultimate goal is to avoid checkmate, the moment of emotional exposure that could lead to heartbreak. The emotionally guarded person becomes adept at identifying potential threats, creating distance when necessary, and maintaining an illusion of strength while revealing as little as possible about their true self. The tragedy of this mindset is that it prevents the very experiences that make love meaningful. When every possibility has been analyzed, there are no genuine surprises. When every interaction is measured, true intimacy is impossible. The joy of discovery is lost when the unknown is treated as a threat. The warmth of deep connection cannot penetrate the cold logic of strategic thinking. Yet, those who approach love like a game often take pride in their skill. They watch others stumble through the messy unpredictability of romance, getting hurt, making mistakes, and believe their method is superior. They mistake their fortress for wisdom, their strategy for strength. But they forget that even in chess, the goal is not simply to defend, it is to win. And in love, winning requires risk. It demands stepping beyond calculations, allowing oneself to be vulnerable, and embracing the unpredictability of connection. A game can never replace a dance. Strategy may prevent pain, but it also prevents joy. The chess master may never lose, but they will never experience the unguarded exhilaration of dancing without counting steps, of loving without calculating risks, of simply existing in the moment with another heart. Lesson 5: Silence becomes life's most trusted companion. Once, words flowed effortlessly, carrying stories, dreams, and vulnerabilities downstream to listening ears. But as the walls of emotional distance grow higher, silence becomes the preferred refuge. Where openness once thrived, guarded expressions now take its place. What was once shared freely is now carefully curated, measured, or withheld altogether. Over time, this silence feels safer than expression. It becomes a loyal companion, one that never exposes, never betrays, never risks rejection. Those who have mastered emotional distance learn that words can be dangerous, that they can reveal too much, invite unwanted closeness, or make them vulnerable to judgment. So they speak less, and when they do, their words are chosen with precision. Silence, once a void waiting to be filled, transforms into a shield. Conversations become surface level, interactions efficient but lacking depth. The fewer words spoken, the fewer chances there are to be misunderstood, rejected, or hurt. But in this self-imposed quiet, something else is lost, the ability to be truly known. The emotionally detached person may believe they have gained control by withholding their inner world, but in doing so, they also deprive themselves of the one thing they truly crave: connection. Words, after all, are bridges. And when bridges are not built, no one can cross. Lesson 5: Silence becomes a safer harbor than speech. Rivers can flood, and words can drown. In time, the heart learns that silence offers a safer refuge than expression ever could. The shift from being an open book to becoming a locked diary happens gradually, as silence transforms from a retreat into a trusted companion. When someone realizes that their shared secrets can be turned into weapons, they begin to grasp the power of keeping their thoughts to themselves. With every betrayal of confidence, every instance where vulnerability leads to pain, the appeal of silence grows stronger. The mind starts keeping a mental record of all the time speaking up resulted in hurt, when openness led to judgment, and when honesty was met with rejection. Silence, by contrast, never distorts, never betrays, and never twists words into something unintended. In its embrace, there is no risk of saying the wrong thing, revealing too much, or being misunderstood. The quiet becomes a cocoon, shielding the most delicate parts of oneself from the sting of careless words and thoughtless reactions. Over time, communication shifts from a natural, effortless flow to a carefully controlled trickle. Every word is weighed, measured, and often swallowed before it has the chance to escape. Speaking in vague generalities replaces open expression, personal questions are deflected with ease, and deep conversations are avoided like dangerous waters. In professional spaces, this transformation might be seen as discretion. In personal relationships, it appears as mystery or emotional distance. The emotionally unavailable person becomes known for their listening skills, unaware that others perceive their silence as a one-way street. They absorb the secrets of others while keeping their own locked away, their pain unspoken, their joy unexpressed. Yet, silence, though protective, inflicts wounds of its own. Unsaid words accumulate like sediment in still water, pressing down beneath the surface. Thoughts that need to be voiced find other ways to manifest, through tension in the body, restless nights, and an ever-growing distance from others that becomes harder to bridge with each passing day. Breaking the silence begins to feel impossible. The longer one remains quiet, the more daunting the idea of speaking becomes. The muscles of vulnerability weaken from disuse, making openness feel like a risk too great to take. The ability to translate inner thoughts into words fades, until conversations become exercises in deflection. Questions about feelings are answered with facts, attempts at emotional depth redirected to safer topics, work, the weather, or other people's lives. Gradually, the art of genuine communication is replaced by the skill of avoidance. But this silence extends beyond speech, it seeps into the self. Emotions are muted, desires suppressed, and needs silenced before they can even fully form. The inner dialogue becomes a whisper, then a murmur, then barely audible at all. The heart learns to beat quietly, to long quietly, to ache quietly. At this point, silence is no longer just the absence of words, it becomes an active presence, a steadfast guardian of hidden truths. It shields the most vulnerable parts of the self, offering the illusion of control in a world that has proven unkind to fragile things. The once open-hearted person now finds their greatest comfort in solitude, in thoughts kept private, in unspoken words that can never be twisted or betrayed. Lesson 6. Past heartbreaks build fortresses around future possibilities. Heartbreak leaves behind more than just memories, it leaves blueprints for self-protection. Much like an architect refining fortifications after each attack, the wounded heart constructs elaborate defenses against future pain. These emotional walls rise gradually, each layer reinforced by the mortar of past disappointments. At first, the defenses are simple, a brief hesitation before trusting, a moment's pause before opening up. But as heartbreaks accumulate, the barriers grow more intricate. What begins as a single wall evolves into an elaborate stronghold, complete with moats of distance and drawbridges that rarely lower. These fortresses take many forms. Some appear as impossibly high standards that no potential partner could ever meet. Others present as subconscious tests and obstacles, ensuring that only the most persistent can get through. The most subtle defenses are nearly invisible, patterns of emotional withdrawal that activate at the first sign of genuine closeness. The cruel paradox is that the very walls built to prevent pain also prevent love. Each layer of defense makes it harder for connection to break through. The fortress, once a source of safety, becomes a prison, with windows too high to see through and doors too heavy to open. The mind, seeking to justify its own defenses, begins crafting self-fulfilling prophecies. Every minor disappointment, every fleeting hurt, becomes further proof that these walls are necessary. Before long, the one behind the walls is both prisoner and guard, scanning for threats while unknowingly trapping themselves in isolation. What makes these fortresses especially deceptive is that they feel rational, even necessary. The pain of the past serves as undeniable evidence that protection is required. The walls become monuments to survival, silent testaments to the vow never to be heard again. Their whispers are seductive, promising security in exchange for solitude. Yet, the price of safety is steep. The heart, safeguarded against sorrow, is also kept from joy. The walls that prevent heartbreak also prevent intimacy. The bridges that never lower ensure no one ever truly arrives. And so, the fortress stands, not as a place of strength, but as a monument to love lost before it ever had a chance to begin. Yet within these fortresses, possibilities wither. The potential for new connections, fresh starts, and different outcomes dies in the shadows of old wounds. The fortress that was meant to protect from pain becomes a generator of a different kind of suffering, the quiet ache of opportunities never explored, connections never made, and love never given a chance to bloom. The fortress also creates its own momentum. Each successful defense against potential pain reinforces the belief in its necessity. Each avoided relationship or prematurely terminated connection serves as validation for the fortress's existence. The walls grow thicker, the defenses more sophisticated, until the very idea of dismantling them becomes terrifying. Most tragically, these fortresses often become so familiar that they feel like home. The emotional distance they create becomes comfortable, the isolation predictable and safe. The thought of living without these walls becomes more frightening than the loneliness within them. The fortress transforms from a shelter into an identity, its builder becoming indistinguishable from the defenses they've created. The future becomes a carefully controlled territory where possibilities are evaluated primarily through the lens of potential pain. Dreams of connection are replaced by strategies for protection. Hope becomes a dangerous luxury replaced by the cold comfort of preventive isolation. The fortress stands as a monument to past pain, casting long shadows over future possibilities, ensuring that history cannot repeat itself by preventing any new chapters from being written at all. Lesson 7: Control emerges as the perfect substitute for vulnerability. In the aftermath of emotional wounds, control becomes a seductive alternative to vulnerability. It presents itself as a solution, a way to prevent future pain by maintaining an iron grip on every aspect of one's emotional life. The transformation from open-hearted vulnerability to calculated control often begins subtly, manifesting first in small decisions to withhold information, regulate emotional expression, or carefully script interactions. The appeal of control lies in its promise of predictability. When past experiences have shown that vulnerability leads to pain, the ability to orchestrate outcomes becomes increasingly attractive. Like a puppet master pulling strings, the emotionally guarded individual begins to manipulate situations, relationships, and their own responses to create an illusion of safety. They master the art of maintaining emotional distance while appearing engaged, perfecting a dance of proximity without true intimacy. This shift toward control manifests in various ways. Conversations become carefully calculated with responses measured and filtered through a lens of self-protection. Emotional displays are regulated, timed, and sometimes even rehearsed. Relationships are managed through an intricate system of boundaries and rules, often unspoken but rigidly enforced. The spontaneity of genuine connection is sacrificed for the security of predictable interactions. The controlled individual develops an acute awareness of power dynamics in relationships. They learn to identify and exploit leverage points, maintaining the upper hand through subtle manipulation of information and expectations. This hyper-vigilance to power dynamics stems from a deep-seated fear of being vulnerable, of losing control and potentially experiencing pain again. Every interaction becomes a chess match where moves are planned several steps ahead, always with an eye toward maintaining emotional superiority or at least equality. However, the pursuit of control extracts a heavy toll. The energy required to maintain this level of emotional management is exhausting. Authentic connections become increasingly rare as genuine moments are sacrificed for controlled ones. The very act of maintaining control creates a barrier to the intimate connections that humans naturally crave. Relationships become exercises in power rather than opportunities for growth and sharing. The irony of control as a substitute for vulnerability lies in its fundamental impossibility. Complete control over emotions, relationships, and outcomes is an illusion. Life's inherent unpredictability means that despite best efforts, pain and disappointment will still find their way through the most carefully constructed defenses. The attempt to control everything often leads to increased anxiety as the individual becomes hyper-aware of potential threats to their emotional fortress. This pattern of control often extends beyond relationships into other aspects of life. Work, hobbies, and daily routines become strictly regulated. Spontaneity is viewed with suspicion, and deviation from established patterns creates anxiety. The controlled individual may excel in professional settings where such rigid structure is valued, but their personal life becomes increasingly sterile and mechanical. The substitution of control for vulnerability creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As control increases, opportunities for genuine connection decrease, which only serves to validate the belief that vulnerability is dangerous. The emotional muscles required for authentic intimacy begin to atrophy from disuse, making it increasingly difficult to return to a more open way of being. Yet within this pattern lies a profound truth. The very desire for control stems from an understanding of how deeply we can be affected by others. The need to control is paradoxically an acknowledgement of our fundamental interconnectedness and capacity for feeling. It's a testament to the depth of our emotional potential even as we work to suppress it. The path of control offers a false promise of safety at the cost of authentic experience. While it may protect from certain forms of pain, it also prevents the experience of genuine joy, love, and connection. The controlled individual trades the rich tapestry of emotional experience for the monochrome security of predictability, finding themselves in a prison of their own making where the walls that keep pain out also keep life's richest experiences at bay. Lesson 8. Time teaches that safety lies in solitude. There's a peculiar comfort that emerges in the spaces between people, in the quiet moments when we're finally alone. As time passes, those who have been hurt repeatedly begin to discover that solitude offers a predictable sanctuary that relationships simply cannot match. The evolution toward emotional unavailability isn't always a conscious choice, but rather a gradual recognition that being alone carries far fewer risks than being vulnerable with others. Through years of social interactions, disappointments, and emotional injuries, many begin to notice patterns. They observe how relationships, even the most promising ones, can suddenly shift like sand beneath their feet. The unpredictability of human connection starts to feel exhausting, while solitude remains consistently reliable. In the silence of one's own company, there are no expectations to manage, no emotions to decode, and no trust to be broken. This realization often begins subtly. Perhaps it's in the relief felt when plans get cancelled or the preference for solo activities over group gatherings. The comfort found in solitary pursuits grows stronger while social interactions begin to feel increasingly draining. What others might view as isolation becomes a form of self-preservation, a chosen path rather than a forced exile. Time becomes both teacher and witness to this transformation. Each passing year brings new examples of why keeping others at arm's length is the safer choice. The person learns to find satisfaction in individual achievements, personal hobbies, and private moments. They develop routines that don't require the presence or input of others. Their world becomes more controlled, more predictable, and paradoxically, more comfortable. The solitude creates a fortress of sorts, one built not of stone, but of carefully cultivated independence. Within these walls, there's no need to explain oneself, no requirement to meet others' emotional needs, and no risk of disappointment. The emotional unavailability that develops isn't just about avoiding pain. It becomes about embracing the peace that comes with self-sufficiency. Social withdrawal patterns become more pronounced over time. Invitations are declined more frequently, phone calls go unanswered, and meaningful conversations are avoided. What might appear as antisocial behavior to others feels like self-care to the person who has learned to find safety in solitude. They begin to view their independence not as a limitation but as an achievement, a hard-won prize after years of emotional turbulence. The world outside their solitary space begins to feel increasingly chaotic and demanding. Social situations that once felt natural now seem loaded with potential complications. The energy required to maintain relationships, the constant need to navigate others' emotions, and the inevitable disappointments all reinforce the belief that solitude is the wiser choice. Yet this safety comes with its own price. The walls that keep pain out also keep connection at bay. The person becomes increasingly skilled at living in isolation, but less capable of handling intimate relationships when they do arise. The muscle of emotional connection, like any unused ability, begins to atrophy. The safety of solitude becomes both shelter and prison, a space that protects but also confines. Time continues its relentless forward march, and with each passing season, the pattern becomes more ingrained. The emotional unavailability that started as a defense mechanism evolves into a way of life. The person learns to find meaning in their solitary pursuits, to derive satisfaction from their independence, and to view their emotional distance not as a deficit but as a strength. The safety that lies in solitude becomes an unshakable truth, learned through years of experience and reinforced by time's persistent lessons. It's a truth that shapes not just how the person relates to others, but how they view themselves and their place in the world. The journey from connection to isolation isn't just about avoiding pain. It's about finding a different kind of peace, even if that peace comes at the cost of deeper human connection. Lesson 9: Warmth freezes into coldness through repeated disappointments. The transformation from warmth to coldness rarely happens in a single defining moment. Instead, it occurs through a series of disappointments that slowly chip away at one's capacity for emotional openness. Like water freezing degree by degree, the heart gradually turns from fluid warmth to crystalline coldness, each disappointment adding another layer of frost to its surface. The process begins with hope, that pure unmarred belief in the goodness of others and the possibility of genuine connection. Each time this hope is met with rejection, betrayal, or indifference, a small part of that warmth dims. At first, the cooling is barely noticeable. Perhaps there's a slight hesitation before sharing feelings, moment of doubt before extending trust, or a brief pause before allowing oneself to believe in someone's promises. As disappointments accumulate, these minor hesitations grow into significant barriers. The person who once freely gave compliments begins to guard their words, fearing they'll be used against them. The individual who readily shared their dreams now keeps them locked away, having learned that vulnerability often leads to judgment or dismissal. The heart that once beat openly with emotion now maintains a steady, controlled rhythm, neither accelerating with joy nor slowing with sadness. This emotional frostbite spreads gradually but inexorably. Like actual frostbite, the victim often doesn't realize the extent of the damage until it's severe. They might notice they no longer feel excited about new relationships, or that they view expressions of affection with suspicion rather than appreciation. The warmth that once came naturally now feels foreign, even dangerous. The cooling process affects not just romantic relationships, but all forms of human connection. Family gatherings that once brought joy become exercises in emotional restraint. Friendships that used to feel effortless now require careful navigation. Even casual interactions carry an underlying current of guardedness, as though every person encountered might be another source of disappointment. What makes this transformation particularly insidious is how it begins to feel like wisdom rather than damage. The cold heart convinces itself that this is maturity, that this is what it means to be grown up and realistic about human nature. Warmth starts to look like naivety, trust like foolishness, and emotional openness like a weakness that can't be afforded. The frozen heart develops its own logic. Better to expect nothing than to hope and be disappointed. Better to keep everyone at arm's length than to let someone close enough to cause pain. Better to be seen as cold than to risk being seen as weak. This logic becomes self-reinforcing as each new interaction is filtered through its lens, finding evidence to support its conclusions while dismissing anything that might challenge them. Even more tragically, this coldness often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The person who approaches others with guardedness tends to receive guardedness in return. The individual who expects disappointment often behaves in ways that make disappointment more likely. The heart that refuses to show warmth rarely experiences warmth from others, thus confirming its belief that coldness is the natural state of human interaction. The final stage of this freezing process is perhaps the most profound, when coldness becomes so familiar that warmth feels uncomfortable. Like someone who's been in a cold room for so long that normal temperature feels too hot, the emotionally frozen person begins to actively resist anything that might thaw their carefully maintained ice. They've learned to navigate the world with their frozen heart, and the prospect of feeling deeply again seems not just frightening but almost painful. This is how warmth freezes into coldness, not through a sudden plunge into icy waters, but through countless small disappointments that gradually transform the heart's natural state from fluid to frozen, from warm to cold, from open to permanently guarded. The process is so gradual that by the time it's complete, the person might not even remember what it felt like to be warm. Final lesson: the heart learns to choose loneliness over potential loss. The final stage in becoming emotionally unavailable arrives when loneliness transforms from a feared state into a chosen companion. This profound shift occurs gradually, often imperceptibly, as the heart concludes that predictable solitude offers more safety than the uncertain promise of connection. It's a calculated decision born from the wisdom of wounds and the mathematics of emotional survival. When someone reaches this point, they've typically experienced enough pain to understand that loneliness, while uncomfortable, is a manageable form of suffering. Unlike the sharp unexpected stabs of betrayal or abandonment, loneliness becomes a dull ache that one can learn to carry. It's predictable, consistent, and most importantly, within one's control. The person who chooses loneliness is like a sailor who, after weathering too many storms, decides to anchor permanently in a sheltered bay rather than risk the open seas again. This choice manifests in subtle ways. Social invitations are declined with well-crafted excuses. Dating opportunities are dismissed with logical explanations. Close friendships are maintained at arm's length and family relationships are managed through careful dosing of attention and availability. The emotionally unavailable person creates a life that appears full on the surface. Career success, hobbies, perhaps even a wide circle of acquaintances, but lacks deep emotional connections. The decision to embrace loneliness often comes with a sense of relief. There's no more pressure to meet others' emotional needs, no requirement to be vulnerable, no risk of disappointment. The energy previously spent navigating relationships can now be channeled into more predictable pursuits. Work becomes more focused, personal projects flourish, and self-reliance grows stronger. This reinforces the belief that choosing loneliness was the right decision. Yet beneath this apparently rational choice lies a complex web of fear, self-protection, and unacknowledged grief. The heart that chooses loneliness isn't truly content with its decision. It's simply convinced that this is the best option available. Like a wild animal that chooses captivity over the dangers of freedom, the emotionally unavailable person trades the possibility of joy for the certainty of safety. This state becomes self-perpetuating. Each day spent in chosen isolation builds stronger justifications for maintaining it. The skills needed for emotional connection begin to atrophy, making the prospect of returning to relationships even more daunting. The world of emotional involvement starts to seem increasingly foreign, like a language once known but now forgotten through lack of use. The most insidious aspect of this final transformation is how it reshapes one's worldview. The emotionally unavailable person begins to see their choice as wisdom rather than withdrawal. They observe others' relationship struggles with a mixture of superiority and pity. Convinced they've found a better way to live, they reframe their emotional unavailability as independence, their isolation as self-sufficiency, their fear as prudence. This chapter marks the completion of the journey from warmth to winter, from openness to closure, from risk to retreat. The heart that once yearned for connection now guards against it. The person who once sought love now seeks safety. The soul that once danced with possibility now stands still in certainty. It's a transformation that brings both peace and price, both protection and loss. The choice of loneliness over potential loss represents more than just a personal decision. It reflects a fundamental shift in how one views human connection itself. It's the final brick in the wall of emotional unavailability, the last step in the journey from being open-hearted to becoming cold-hearted. What began as a response to pain becomes a way of life, a philosophy of existence, a chosen path through the wilderness of human relationships.